Welcome to True Tears Stories. Please like this video and subscribe to True Tears Stories. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The word wasn't shouted. It didn't come in a fit of rage, and there wasn't any dramatic slam of a door to echo behind it. It was simple, casual, dismissive, like she was brushing lint off his shoulder. Weak. She said it while pouring coffee into a white mug, her back half turned, the scent of burnt toast hanging in the kitchen. The word hit him not like a slap, but like a note left on the counter. Intentional, cool, unbothered. He blinked, spoon halfway to his mouth, the cereal turning soggy in the bowl he wasn't really hungry for. Gavin had always known that something was off, but he couldn't explain it, not clearly, not to friends, not even to himself. There was a distance in Elise lately, a new way her eyes stayed flat even when she smiled. She still smiled. That's what made it harder to point out. But the smiles were for show now, like window dressing on a building long since emptied. He kept staring at her back, the slope of her shoulders under the navy robe she only wore when she wasn't sleeping in their bed. "What did you just say?" he asked. Not sharply. He wasn't angry yet, just cold, like someone stepping into unexpected shade. "I said—" She turned to look at him finally, no surprise in her face. Just tired annoyance. "You're weak. You never stand up for yourself, Gavin. Not with me, not with anyone." She didn't even raise her voice. She didn't need to. Gavin let the spoon rest back in the bowl. He didn't respond, not right away. In truth, his body was still catching up with the moment. That word, weak, tore through years of compromise, of bending him to keep peace, of brushing off snide jokes at parties, and forgiving too quickly after she vanished for weekends with old friends from college. He knew what this was now. It wasn't about the cereal or the way he had let her lead every argument to exhaustion. It wasn't even about the remark itself. It was about the quiet strategy behind her gaze. Elise was testing the edge, seeing if he'd flinch. Or maybe, more accurately, confirming he wouldn't. He stood slowly, chair legs scraping the tile. "I'm going in early today." "You always do," she murmured, already scrolling her phone. At the office, the day was a blur of meetings he barely heard. Words passed around him but didn't land. His mind replayed that morning like it had volume now, like someone had turned up the echo of her voice. Weak, weak, weak. But there was something else now, rising beneath the shame. A question. What have I allowed to grow in the space where my self-respect used to be? He drove home later than usual, hoping she'd be asleep. She wasn't. She was on the couch, wearing lipstick. Lipstick she never wore for him anymore. Legs crossed, wine glass in hand, and next to her, his name was Jeremy. Gavin had met Jeremy once before, a friend from Pilates. At least that's what Elise had called him. Jeremy had a banker's smile and expensive-looking loafers that didn't suit the laid-back stories Elise liked to tell about her crowd. That night, they were sitting far too comfortably. "Jeremy brought some legal papers by," she said, as Gavin set his keys down. "Since you've been avoiding the conversation." Jeremy cleared his throat like a man trying to appear less intrusive than he was. "Divorce mediation," he said smoothly. "Elise thought it would be easier if I—" Gavin held up a hand, silencing him without anger. Did she ask you to? Jeremy blinked. Excuse me? Did she ask you to handle this for her? Gavin asked again, calmly now, stillness behind every syllable. Yes, Elise said from the couch, eyes unblinking. He's better at this sort of thing. You're not exactly aggressive in negotiations. The way she said it, like she was proud, like she'd found a workaround for her husband. Gavin walked into the kitchen. He opened a drawer, closed it, just to do something with his hands. The lights buzzed above him, and the wine on the counter still had condensation on the bottle, fresh, like they'd been celebrating something before he came home. He turned back and looked at them. All right, he said. What does that mean? Elise asked. It means, Gavin said, picking up the wine glass Jeremy hadn't touched. If you want him to handle this, I think he should, all of it. Jeremy raised an eyebrow. I don't think that's exactly... Gavin held up a hand again. That same quiet control. You're already in my house. You're already handling my wife. Might as well handle my lawyer, too. There was a moment. A flicker of something in Elise's eyes. Confusion. Maybe even fear. And Jeremy, for all his polished confidence, suddenly looked like a man realizing he'd been handed a burden, not a victory. Gavin poured the wine into the sink and rinsed the glass. Then he smiled. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly. Just with the peace of a man who no longer had to explain himself. Elise didn't follow him upstairs that night. Not with words, not even with footsteps. But Gavin heard them talking after he left the kitchen. The low hum of her voice. The clipped edge of Jeremy's reply. The slight rise in volume when she tried to control the tone of the conversation. And then quiet, heavy and unresolved. Gavin lay on the guest bed that night, not because he had to, but because he wanted a different room, a different perspective. The ceiling in there had a faint crack he'd always meant to fix. Strange how silence and betrayal made small flaws like that feel almost comforting. Human, honest, unlike the rest of the house. In the morning, Jeremy was gone. Elise was at the dining table in a silk blouse, laptop open, pretending to type. She didn't look up when Gavin passed through, but her mouth twitched ever so slightly, like she was about to say something. He didn't wait for it. At work, Gavin didn't tell anyone. What was there to say? That the man his wife had brought into their living room was now unofficially representing her in a divorce? That the insult she'd thrown at him had finally knocked loose something solid? He kept his day going like clockwork, responded to emails, laughed when appropriate, even offered to help a junior analyst with a report he didn't technically have time for. But under it all, something was moving inside him, like soil being turned after too long lying dormant. By the end of the week, Elise had emailed him a draft of the divorce proposal. It was, predictably, weighted in her favor. She assumed he'd concede, like he always had. She even had the audacity to suggest they keep things amicable for the sake of mutual friends. Mutual friends who hadn't invited Gavin to anything in months. Instead of reacting, he made a quiet call. His attorney, Margaret Choi, was someone he'd met through a former client. Sharp, graceful, uninterested in drama, but masterful at navigating it. When Gavin sat down in her office, she glanced at the papers once and said, "She thinks you're not going to fight this." "I'm not," Gavin said. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Not in the way she expects," he added. He explained, simply, steadily, what had been happening. The boyfriend, the backdoor legal route, The word she'd used. Margaret didn't flinch. "She's counting on you staying silent," she said. "You're choosing clarity." Exactly. And clarity, it turned out, was far more powerful than confrontation. Gavin started small. First, he moved back into the master bedroom, said nothing about it, just folded his shirts neatly into drawers she'd cleared months ago. Then, he adjusted the thermostat to his preferred setting. Elise commented on it once, annoyed. He just nodded. Then came the mail. He began redirecting all joint financial correspondence to a private P.O. box. Elise noticed a few weeks in. "What's going on with the bank statements?" she asked one evening, leaning on the counter with the same wine glass she always used. "I made a change," Gavin said. "It's easier for me." "That's not how we've handled it before." "No," he said gently, "it isn't." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. And she didn't push, not yet, because her version of him, weak, passive, accommodating, was beginning to slip, and she wasn't sure who was replacing him. A few days later, Jeremy showed up again. Not during the day this time, but at 7 p.m., in slacks and a blazer, like he'd just stepped out of a client dinner. Gavin answered the door before Elise could. "Evening," Jeremy said, trying to keep it casual. "You're here to talk business?" Gavin asked. "Yes, Elise thought we could clarify some items in the filing." "She home?" Jeremy looked past him toward the living room. "She said she would be." "I didn't ask if she said," Gavin replied. "I asked if she's here." Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. "I'm happy to forward any additional notes to my attorney," Gavin said, stepping back slightly but not inviting him in. "But you won't be meeting in my home again. That arrangement's over." Jeremy's mouth opened, closed. Then Gavin asked, "Do you even want to be in this?" "In what?" "This triangle. This balancing act. Because if not, I suggest you stop doing her heavy lifting." "I'm just trying to help. She's not your problem yet," Gavin said, quiet and final. "And soon she won't be mine." He closed the door gently. No slamming, no power plays. Just a man taking back something that had been given away too easily. Inside, Elise came down the stairs just as the latch clicked. She looked at the door, then at him. "You didn't let him in?" "No," Gavin said, walking past her. Didn't see the point. He didn't say it to wound her. He said it because it was true. In bed that night, she didn't speak to him. The silence wasn't heavy. It was honest. Gavin's mornings started earlier now. Not because he had more to do, but because he felt clearer, lighter, even with the divorce still in motion. The routines he used to rush through, just to keep pace with Elise's moods or the ever-present tension in their home, had turned into moments of quiet strength. The coffee tasted stronger. His clothes felt better. The man in the mirror looked older, yes, but more grounded. There was something different in his reflection now, something that didn't flinch under scrutiny. Elise, on the other hand, was starting to unravel in tiny, telling ways. Her voice took on a higher pitch when she spoke to him, like she was trying to reassert a dynamic that no longer existed. She made little digs, but they didn't stick. Gavin didn't absorb them anymore. He let them pass through. She noticed. "You've changed," she said one night, almost accusingly. "No," he replied softly, not looking up from his book. "I just stopped pretending." For years, he'd played the part she'd cast him in. Dependable, easy, safe. And in return, she had drifted. First emotionally, then physically, then finally, shamelessly, into someone else's arms. But what she hadn't realized was that the strength she claimed he lacked had been redirected inward, buried under keeping peace, holding their lives together in silence. Now it was coming to the surface. Margaret, his attorney, called him one afternoon. Her voice was crisp, professional, but there was a subtle satisfaction behind her words. Elise's counsel submitted revisions to the settlement. Looks like they're trying to push for more, claiming contributions to your business. Gavin raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Elise didn't contribute to the business. That's what we'll assert, Margaret said, but she's clearly trying to leverage what she thinks is still yours to give away. Gavin thought about that. The phrasing, still yours to give away. It felt too familiar, too accurate. He cleared his throat. Reject the proposal and counter with the original offer, minus the alimony. There was a pause. Are you sure? Yes, Gavin said. If Jeremy wants to handle the lawyer, he can also handle the fallout. Elise wasn't pleased. That evening, she hovered around the kitchen like a wasp looking for a landing spot. You're being petty, she said. No, Gavin said, without raising his voice. I'm being precise. You think this makes you look strong? She asked, laughing bitterly. Letting me go, cutting me out, pretending you're above it all? He looked at her fully. For the first time in days. You were gone a long time before I let you go. And I'm not pretending. I just finally believe it. She blinked, and for a moment, he saw the real reaction behind her anger, the small, confused part of her that hadn't expected him to find this version of himself. Because people like Elise needed someone beneath them to feel steady, and Gavin was no longer beneath anyone. The final weeks moved fast after that. Jeremy stopped showing up. Elise began taking more late-night phone calls in the garage, as if she needed walls between them to feel in control again. But Gavin didn't listen anymore. Her drama no longer orbited him. It simply passed by, like weather he no longer bothered to prepare for. When the official divorce meeting came, Elise sat at the table in a fitted blazer, hands folded, face unreadable. But her posture was different, a little too stiff, a little too controlled. Gavin didn't gloat. He didn't frown. He just listened. The lawyer spoke. Papers slid across polished wood. And when Elise finally signed, she didn't look at him, not once. He signed after her, steady and calm, and handed the pen back to Margaret. It was over. Later, outside the building, Elise caught up with him in the parking lot. The wind was tugging her hair loose from its clip. I didn't think you'd go through with it, she said. Not cruelly, just quietly. I know, he said. You never did. She tilted her head, searching his face for something. Regret? A second chance? But Gavin wasn't carrying those things anymore. You'll regret it, she said after a moment. No, Gavin said, walking away. You might, but I won't. He didn't look back. Driving home that day felt different. It wasn't freedom in the fireworks and celebration sense. It was quieter than that. Like stepping out of a too small jacket you hadn't realized had been restricting your breath. At home, the space was his again. He cleared out the guest room, moved his books and guitar back into the office Elise once claimed as her studio, but rarely used. He turned on music, opened the windows, made dinner with too much garlic, and not enough wine to pair. But it tasted perfect. There were no grand declarations, just small, steady choices, each one reclaiming a little more of himself. and for the first time in years, Gavin slept deeply. Not because he was exhausted, but because he was finally at peace. The mornings were brighter now, even when the sky was overcast. Gavin had started walking again, real walks, not just from the front door to the driveway with keys in hand. He took his time, winding through the neighborhood without a destination, letting his feet follow a rhythm his life hadn't known in years. He passed familiar houses with unfamiliar details. A cracked window pane that had been replaced. A new tree planted in a front yard. These were things he'd missed while living on autopilot, buried under obligation in the endless task of maintaining appearances. At the park, he sat on a bench near the pond, coffee in one hand, silence in the other. He didn't need anyone to fill it. That had been the biggest shift. He had always believed solitude was something to avoid, something lonely people settled for. But now, it felt like armor, like rest, like truth. He had lunch with his sister the following week. Lisa was 3 years older, and never much liked Elise. At the time, Gavin had dismissed her warnings as overprotective sister bias. Now, he realized she'd simply seen clearly what he had been too hopeful to accept. "She called you weak?" Lisa asked over a grilled cheese and tomato soup. "After everything?" Gavin shrugged. "I think she said it because I used to let her." Lisa smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You were never weak. You were just waiting for the storm to stop before you started moving. But she was the storm." He chuckled quietly, more touched than he let show. "I think I knew that, deep down." "You know what's strange?" she said, wiping her hands. "You seem lighter now, like you lost 50 pounds. "Closer to 140, Gavin said. "She took the good silver, too." Lisa laughed until she nearly spilled her water. In the days that followed, Elise reached out once more. A short message. No apology. Just, "Hope things are settling. Let me know if you need anything else signed." He didn't reply. There was nothing left to clarify. Instead, he made a different call. To a friend he hadn't seen in over a year. Paul, from his cycling days. They met at the trail one Saturday morning, and the handshake turned into a genuine hug. "Glad to see you back," Paul said. "Heard things got complicated." "Yeah," Gavin said, strapping on his helmet. "But clarity's better than comfort, right?" Paul grinned. "You're starting to sound like a man with his life back." They rode together for an hour. Not fast, just steady. Wind in their ears. Trees shifting gently with the season. Gavin's legs burned halfway through, but he didn't care. He was tired for the right reasons this time. When he got home, he showered and stood for a long time at the mirror, not to analyze his face or the lines that seemed more permanent now, but to see if the man he felt like matched the one looking back. He did. The house still echoed more than it used to, but that was okay. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Not for someone new necessarily, but for new things. Better choices, honest peace, laughter that didn't come at the expense of self-worth. And Gavin was ready. Not because he'd won anything, not because he'd proven Elise wrong, but because he'd finally stopped letting someone else decide what he deserved. He walked into the office, his office now, and sat at the desk. The framed deed to the house sat under the lamp. He hadn't needed to hold on to it, really. It was just paper. But still, he kept it nearby. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. The silence of the house was no longer something Gavin feared. In fact, It had become one of the most comforting parts of his day. He'd wake up early, make a simple breakfast, and sometimes just sit in the kitchen with the radio playing quietly in the background. Nothing loud, just enough to let the air feel alive. There were no more sidelong glances at Elise's empty seat. No invisible weight waiting for him to do something right or wrong. He'd stopped playing defense in his own life. And slowly, he began noticing the small joys again. The way sunlight came through the living room window at just the right angle in the mornings. The way coffee tasted a little better when he didn't have to rush it. The quiet pride in fixing the broken lock on the back gate all by himself. These weren't dramatic triumphs, but they were his. For years, he'd been told directly and indirectly that his softness was a flaw, that his patience made him passive, that his desire to keep peace made him spineless. But now, Gavin saw the truth. What some called weakness had actually been strength, just the quiet kind, the kind that holds steady when everything else is shaking, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything out loud. He didn't miss Elise. Not really. He missed the version of himself he used to hope he could be. Strong, clear-eyed, unafraid to take up space. And somehow, by letting her go, he'd become that man. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was freedom. The kind you don't ask for, the kind you earn by walking away with your dignity intact. And with every quiet breath in his now peaceful home, Gavin knew the strongest thing he'd ever done was refuse to fight for someone who never fought for him. Here's to starting again. Not with fire, but with clarity.